Hey there, this is Tom with the Diogenes Lamp podcast. I appreciate you listening in, and most importantly, I hope you enjoy what you hear. Before we start with today's episode, I'm going to ask you for a small favor. Believe it or not, history podcasts, especially in their early stages, tend not to be cash cows. Shocker, I know. I too was blindsided by this news. Now, I didn't go into this for the money, I think that much is obvious. But unfortunately, books, research materials, and equipment aren't free. Please, go to patreon.com/Diogenes Lamp Podcast, and for less than the price of a coffee once a month, you can become a member and get access to bonus episodes, recommended reading lists and documentaries, shout-outs, and anything else we'll offer in the future as this project grows. If you are especially broke, hey, I get it, but please, make sure to give us a 5-star review when you listen to us on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, and subscribe to the pod on your preferred podcast listening medium. Your support is appreciated, and more importantly, it is needed in order to keep this operation going. On that note, I hope you have a great day, and now back to the show. When the weather clears and is cloudless, when February comes, I shall take down my rifle and my fine pistol to go down to the Omalos and Mussuri road to make mothers without sons, women without their husbands. Traditional Cretan Rizitiko song. Good evening. Welcome to the Greek Civil War segment of the Diogenes Lamp Podcast, episode 14, Battle of Crete, part 1. We have with us tonight Oliver and Shaddy. How you guys doing?
Great, man. Stoked to be here. Really excited for this.
Yeah, up in the cold depths of Michigan.
Very cold.
Yeah, I mean, listen, I'd rather have that than down here in Florida, honestly.
Listen, the three of us are Mediterranean. None of us like the cold, okay? We all
This
like
is
warm
true.
climate. We want to be on Crete, Lebanon, wherever. This is better than the snow, dude.
Mediterranean climate's definitely the best climate. And good food.
Right?
Good people, generally speaking.
Yes.
Except the Italians. I'm joking. No. So, where we left off last, Mussolini and the Italians, speaking of the Italians, last-ditch effort to best the Greeks in southern Albania failed miserably, and as a result, Mussolini was forced to rely on his German ally, aided by Bulgaria, to pick up the pieces. We also witnessed what would become the last successful blitzkrieg in World War II, with over 200,000 Greeks in Epirus cut off from the rest of Greece, and Prime Minister Korizis hastily shooting himself in the head. And shortly after that, the Greek and Allied defenses quickly collapsed. Despite a valiant effort, the Germans accomplished in approximately 22 days what the Italians could not in 160 days: the capture of Athens and the entirety of the Greek mainland.
I was going to say, you mentioned it was the last Blitzkrieg?
The last successful
Okay.
blitzkrieg of Europe, yeah. Because Russia
last
failed.
Successful Blitzkrieg.
Yeah,
Oh, okay.
right?
Oh, interesting.
Technically, it failed. I mean, it was the last successful blitzkrieg in World War II. It's funny, too, there's a lot of similarities with France because, remember, Greece also had built a huge defensive line like France did. Right? The
Oh,
Metaxas line. Yeah, the 21 forts, right? It was like, they called it a mini Maginot line. It's like a small Maginot line. So, a lot of similarities, right? But yeah, that was the last successful blitzkrieg in Europe in World War II.
Wow.
Yeah. So by May 1st, oh, and one other thing that I thought was funny that I think I left out last episode, when the prime minister shot himself in the head after he wanted a resignation, and then he didn't get the resignation, so he went home and just blew his brains out. The king and everyone in the government lied to the press and said he just had a heart attack to not let everyone freak out.
Yeah, man, some things never change.
Yeah, because it's like, if you're getting invaded by the Germans, and they're like, "Oh yeah, by the way, the prime minister just shot himself." You'd be like, "Oh my god,
Yeah, yeah. Oh god, the absolute panic
we're
that
all
would
screwed."
induce.
Yeah, yeah,
Oh
we're all
yeah,
gonna die.
yeah. That'd be bad. He was the one you mentioned the last episode where he kind of his wife was worried about him when they came
Yeah,
like looking for him. That one.
yeah, yeah. Then I think
Man.
Prince Paul or whoever came to his house. The king was like, "Keep an eye on him." And then Crown Prince Paul, I believe, went to his house, and then like as they walked in, bang, then they busted open the door, and he was in a pool of his own blood on
Man.
Good Friday of all days.
Oh, you mentioned that too. Wow, that's
Yeah,
wild.
yeah, it's nuts. So by May 1st, the struggle in the mainland had ended. Major evacuations of any remaining Allied forces to either the islands or Egypt were complete, and the very first and a few of the bigger and pressing decisions by the new masters of mainland Greece had been made. That first big decision, made chiefly by Germany, was how the newly conquered lands would be administered, or in simpler terms, what system or method would be used to rule. Like, would it be just a straightforward occupation, as Germany already had in Poland, for example? Or would the Axis powers, led primarily by Germany, and you also had Bulgaria involved as well, opt for giving their new subjects at least the facade of having some independence? Like Vichy France is the really popular, is the good example, right? Where a puppet regime had been established, and then some French land also had been outright annexed by Germany. And we're going to see that the Germans push essentially for that option, the second option, in opposition to the Italians who wanted an occupation, which they thought would be much simpler in structural terms, anyways. There's a couple of good reasons why they opted for like a puppet government and that kind of thing, as opposed to what happened in Poland. You know, one thing I take away from reading historian Mark Mazur, an author who's a great historian, by the way, is a point he makes, which is that racially speaking, Greece and Poland are much different, right? And remember, we're talking about Nazis, and when you're a Nazi, race tends to matter almost above everything else. It's a big deal because you're a Nazi, and that's what comes with the
Yes.
territory. you
Oh
know.
yeah.
So yeah, the Greeks were not Slavs like Poland or the Poles of Poland or Yugoslavia, Russians, Ukrainians, whoever, right? Additionally, the Nazis really loved the accomplishments of ancient Greece. They saw it kind of like as a cultural paragon that the Nazis aspired to reach. And additionally, like there was also pragmatic stuff to it as well. Is that now, for the most part, the British threat to the oil fields in Romania had been mostly thoroughly removed, at least from the mainland. But it hadn't happened completely just yet. The mainland had been expelled to allies, but as we know, Greece is much more than just Thessaloniki, Athens, Patra, Kalamata, and the rest of the mainland. There's a lot of small remote islands, but those fell too by early May as well. But there was still one holdout, and it wasn't a little island either, and it couldn't be ignored by Hitler. Crete, the largest island of the Hellenic Republic, fifth largest island of the Mediterranean, and by May 1st, plans had already been set in motion for the invasion and the subduing of the island.
Yeah. So you mentioned before we started that the people on Crete were like of a different, that cut from a different kind of cloth than the people on the mainland of Greece.
Yeah, they have that reputation. That's kind of like what I put, that first, that song, it's a rhyme that I put at the beginning of the song. Yeah, the Cretans are known for like being kind of a rowdy bunch. Crete, it's the place where Zeus was born, where
Oh, is
Venizelos,
it?
yeah, it's the birthplace of Zeus. It's where Venizelos, who's obviously the listeners know if they've been, and you guys know, very famous politician, Venizelos, right? Kazantzakis, super famous author, Cretan. I mean, Crete's, yeah. The Cretans, there's a saying. So, like, where my family's from in Mani, they say Maniates and Cretans are cousins because we both practice blood feuds, or used to, anyways, right back in the 1800s and stuff like that. They have their own dialect, their own dances, their own, every part of Greece and, every part of every country, every area has their own dialect and stuff like that. Everything's regional, right? So Crete's no different. But yeah, they have a reputation for being a bit of a rowdy bunch, a little wild, a little more on the wild side, you could say. So why was Crete, so important, right? Well, the British had been on Crete since 1940, November of 1940, when the British formally took over responsibility for the defense of the island with the permission of, Metaxas and Commander-in-Chief Papagos, of course. The well-known deepwater harbor of Suda Bay, which today serves as a U.S. naval base, serviced the British Royal Navy at the time. This, of course, was unacceptable to Hitler for many of the reasons we talked about earlier. So Operation Mercury was created in order to secure the Nazis' southern flank once and for all and ensure there would be no thorns in their side while Operation Barbarossa, the invasion of the USSR, would be going on. Just like the battle on the mainland, the Allied forces would pull up, like a heroic, but it's going to be practically hopeless struggle. But the results of the battle will affect Nazi military planning for the rest of the war. Like Oliver said, Crete, again, has a reputation, like we talked about, mother of all islands, a lot of famous people from there. Crete is awesome. I honeymooned in Crete. Highly recommend. Crete's an awesome place. If you can go to Crete,
What's the terrain
go.
like there?
It's mental. It's insane.
Is it?
Yeah, I mean, all of Greece is like really mountainous and stuff, but Crete's really brutal. There's there's one huge road that goes like east-west and it hugs the entire north side of the coast. But like the south side of Crete, which is where the Libyan Sea touches, I mean, there's not a lot of big roads there, and there's just giant like gorges, valleys, giant cliffs. I mean, there was one time where we were driving on the side of a mountain, and the two lanes went into one lane, and there was one light, a stop, like a flashing light or like a traffic light, and it would be red on one side, then allow the cars from the other way to go, and then it would turn green on your side, then you would go because only one car could fit at a time. Yeah, stuff like that, right?
Okay, that's wild.
Yeah, it's nuts. I mean, and the Cretans too, they're known for being like extremely hospitable people, full of life and zest, like old Greeks, but also like very traditional. And it was also an island that had seen many invaders and occupiers come and go. There were Arab pirates were lodged there for like a couple hundred years that the Byzantines had a really hard time getting rid of on the island. Venetians were there, the Turks were there, before their final unification with the mainland. Also, it's the place where Diogenes the Cynic, the philosopher, who the podcast is named after, he was sold as a slave there when he was also captured by pirates in ancient times.
Oh, really?
Yeah. He ended up there.
That's funny. I didn't know that about him.
Yeah. He was a slave for a little bit. There's one last little quote I found which kind of gives a feel for the Cretans. End quote. There are three sorts of men. Those who eat eggs without the shells, those who eat eggs with the shells, and those who gobble them up with the shells and the egg cups as well. Those third kind are called Cretans. So that's the reputation. Cretans, they're known for being a little off their rocker. Good people.
A little savage. Yeah.
Yeah, a little on the more savage side, And that last bit is that quotes from Mr. The author Kazantzakis says Captain Michalis is the name of the book. It's a famous book about a failed Cretan rebellion, pretty much. So, anyways, you get the point. Cretans have a reputation. And for the last week or so, these hospitable and rugged people have been witnessing the bloody and exhausted fragments of the Greek and Allied forces wash up on their shores like driftwood. Just like the defense of the mainland, the defenders knew that holding Crete would be a bit of a stretch. The nearest Allied base that could come to the aid of Crete was in Egypt, which, mind you, was an entirely different theater of war, with its own very drastic needs. And God forbid Egypt fell with the Suez Canal, then Britain would be practically cut off from its colony of India, also known as the Jewel of the Crown, for obvious reasons, because it's India, right? So as important as Crete was, Egypt was much more important, and the defenders would have to deal with what they had, and what they had, as we'll see, won't be much. And also, people forget something like 2 or 3 million Indians fought in World War II. A lot.
Yeah.
Everyone forgets that. Let me Google. I'm pretty sure. How? 2.5 million.
Wow.
right? So if Egypt fell and the Suez Canal was blocked, they wouldn't be able to get into that theater. They wouldn't be able to help the British. That's nuts, though.
Oh yeah, yeah.
So
Because all I'm ever hearing about on the History Channel is Italy, Germany, America, Russia.
right, Britain, yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
Brazilians fought in World War II a little bit too.
Brazilians really.
Yeah,
Wow.
they had like a
How about
smoking snakes
how,
logo
how about
for division.
the Lebanese? Did Lebanese make much of a dent in the Second World War?
I don't think so.
The Lebanese were at
Yeah.
the coffee shops drinking chai, bro.
they were they were laying low on this one. No, they were involved in like other stuff. I think they were involved in like a lot of like espionage stuff went down around there, I believe, because it was held by the British at the time. I think.
Okay.
I could be totally wrong, honestly. I know very little, so I should probably stop talking because I really just don't know much about Lebanon, World War II era. We talked about the mad scramble to get the hell off the mainland last episode, and luckily a lot of those troops were able to get to Crete, about 18,000. Another 12,000 British reinforcements came in from Egypt, and the Greeks were able to muster another 12,000 of their own for a total of roughly 42,000. Okay? They were
Wow.
placed under the command of Major General Bernard Freyberg, who had been commander of the New Zealander troops in the defense of the mainland. And his nickname was Tiny. Don't ask me why. And he was told by his superior, General Sir Archibald Wavell, who had been told by Churchill directly that, and quote, the island must be stubbornly defended. So those are the orders from Churchill, right?
Okay. What's the geopolitical like? What's the consequence? Like, what's it look like right now? Like, why do the Allies want to defend it, and why do the Axis want it?
You know, it's a funny question. Some people say that like Hitler's a fucking moron for even like pursuing Crete so hard. Like there were other
Oh yeah.
islands he should. Yeah, like there's this one book like Seven Reasons that. Listen, the fact is that once America entered the war, there was no way Germany could have ever won just because America just mass produces everything. Like we make more tanks than they had shells. Like it's in, like the moment America entered the war, it's game over. And also arguably Russia. Like that was the dumbest thing he did. Like
Right.
you know, like
I
you
gotta
just
think though. At some point in the war, Hitler probably thought he was untouchable. He could do
yeah
anything, and that's
yeah
probably just he
hubris.
just yeah.
Right? Hubris. Yeah, I mean, I think so too. A lot of it just comes down to that. I mean, you know, and there's a lot of stuff that like comes out as time passes. Like I was reading this thing recently that like even the Germans weren't expecting to beat France like so quickly, and like if France had just done a couple things differently, they could have beaten Germany like in the very first stages of the war. You know what I mean? Just
Yeah,
roll the
yeah.
dice type stuff. You know?
I wonder who the fastest conquering force was since mankind. Like in terms of
Probably the
like just
Mongols,
conquering the Mongols.
I
They
guess.
they just took the most land in the quickest time.
I'd say so. I don't know
What
though.
about what about Alexander the Great? He probably had more land than anybody ever,
Yeah,
right?
but his campaign was like 10, 20 years.
Okay.
The Mongols, I think, were like crazy lightning fast.
I thought I remember reading somewhere actually that like the Blitzkrieg approach was like inspired from something Mongolian or historically.
I mean, it means
I remember
lightning
reading
war.
it somewhere. Yeah, but like the approach of just like basically like shell shock to the resistance of something.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, all it really is today, like at the time it was state of the art, and like other people were doing it without knowing, but what it really is combined arms warfare. That's all it is. You're combining Air Force with infantry with armored divisions, which is like, you know, what you're supposed to use effectively even today. It's combined arms warfare. That's like everything you're supposed to do is to be effective in war anyways, right?
I
I
see.
just
Yeah.
I love how just like every time Greece is invaded by a foreign country or a foreign enemy, they win.
Ha. Well,
It's really
not with the Germans we didn't, but we did with the Italians.
the Italians 1-0. I got
The
you.
Italians were like, fuck these guys. The Germans were like, it's too much.
Yeah,
We're
but at
tired
that
now.
time though, the Germans were the most elite, probably the most
Right.
elite fighting force on Earth. Right?
Yeah. I mean, the German soldier was very well trained. Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
like they
I
were
mean, their
very good. Yeah.
technology, man, their tanks. It was insane.
Yeah, I mean, some of that's a bit overhyped though. Like the shit was good, but a lot of it was over-engineered. Like think of your BMW, right?
Yeah.
Like there was a really good quote where like, yeah, like the Panther tank was great. Like one Panther was better than like three or four or five
Tiger
Sher-
tanks.
no, like Sherman tanks, the American, right?
Oh, the
One
Sherman
Tiger.
tanks.
Yeah,
Yeah,
one
yeah.
Tiger was better than four or five Shermans. But the
Yep.
saying
Yep.
also goes, you were more likely to see four or five Shermans than you were to see one Tiger, right? It's like, so
Yeah.
it's like the practicality of it's like, what the fuck good is, you know, the Russians had good stuff too. A lot of that stuff I feel like is overhyped. And, a lot of it too, like, like the clean watermark theory was a thing. Like, not theory, it's actual thing. It was like after post World War II, like Weimar German generals literally talked about how we have to clean the Wehrmacht, the German army, and separate the German army from the SS, that we can rehabilitate it, so then we can have them fight the communists. Because once the Nazis were defeated, everything pivoted to just fighting the communists. So they literally rehabilitated all these Nazis, all of them, the images of all these Nazis. A lot of Nazis served in NATO after, like a lot of shit, Operation Paperclip and
Wow.
stuff. Yeah, that's another thing we'll talk about later, but you're gonna see like it's yeah, and even in our story here, there's a lot of Greeks that collaborated with the Nazis in administrative stuff and stuff like that. And later on, General Pongalos, who sets up the security battalions and stuff. Anyways, 42,000 sounds pretty good as a number, especially when compared to what the Germans will bring. But when we start to talk about other stuff that really wins battles at this time in history, it's going to quickly become apparent that this is mostly a hollow force. For starters, the defenders would enjoy zero, and I mean absolutely zero air support. None. So, bad start, right?
The Greeks didn't have an air force?
The Greek Air Force had been defeated in the mainland. They had a very small Air Force to start with. And then, like the other reason for this is that there just simply was not, there were not enough planes to go around, for lack of better words. And more so because the planes on Crete, which was 36 at most at any given moment leading up to the campaign, had been relentlessly pursued both in the air and on the ground by the Luftwaffe leading up to Operation Mercury. So much so that by the time the invasion begins, the few dozen or so Royal Air Force planes that survived fled to Egypt. So the British were like, we're fucking out. It's not worth it for us. So the Germans will have complete control of the skies.
That's
Which is,
a big
again,
problem.
yeah, exactly. It's a huge problem.
Holy
Bad
crap.
start. Yeah, absolutely. Additionally, during the hasty exit from the mainland, virtually all heavy equipment was left behind. So we're talking about stuff like trucks, armored vehicles, tanks, and heavy guns. All in all, they were able to gather 22 tanks, 8 3.7-inch howitzers, and roughly 50 anti-aircraft guns, the majority of which were captured Italian guns shipped in from Africa, not in great shape. Because remember, the Italians were also fighting in Africa. They were fighting the British in Africa at the time. So they were bringing up old equipment from that and, and whatnot. The British were shipping it up. The Greeks had even less equipment to work with many soldiers having less than a dozen rounds to just use per soldier.
Wow.
Yeah,
Oh my god, man.
yeah. So, like, in addition to simply not having enough firepower, be it ammunition or just guns, there was the issue of also the most basic and vital needs in war, communication. Like radios were in short supply, and the ones that were available were in bad shape, just like the tanks and other equipment. Without radios, the only other option were the telephone lines, which were strung along telegraph poles, or of course you could do like runners and give a throwback to World War One, right, where you like give a guy a piece of paper and like run this 10 miles,
Yeah, it's like the Battle of Marathon Runner. They're still doing
Yeah, where
that.
the guy, yeah, the guy's like, we need reinforcements. Then he dies. You're like, damn it, I need another runner. Our runners keep dying after they deliver the messages. I don't know what to do.
Yeah.
They keep yelling victory, then dropping dead. The message is not victory, though. This is not.
That's so funny.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, as I'm sure you can put together with all this stuff, like these telephone lines quickly go kaput once the bombs start to go boom, right? They get knocked out. And even if they wouldn't get knocked out when the bombs start blowing up, the enemy just cuts the lines once they have the opportunity. Like they're no dummies, right? So,
Okay.
that was the issue with that. And then there was another sorely lacking need the Allies didn't have in Crete: roads. And we talked about this earlier, Oliver and Shaddy, but like just like the Italians had issues up in Epirus with very poor roads and stuff like that. This makes getting supplies to defenders or maneuvering around in general very difficult. So, General Freyberg, you remembered Major General Freyberg from the doomed defense of the mainland from our last episode. Well, he was no dummy. And seeing this situation, wrote to his superior Wavell on May 1st, quote, "Forces at my disposal are totally inadequate to meet attack envisaged. Unless fighter aircraft are greatly increased and naval forces made available to deal with seaborne attack, I cannot hope to hold out with land forces alone, which as a result of campaigning Greece are now devoid of any artillery, have insufficient tools for digging, very little transport, and inadequate war reserves of equipment and ammunition," end quote. In spite of all of this, Major General Freyberg was ready to follow his orders that above all, end quote, Crete is to be held. So, kind of like tough shit. You need to
Yeah.
hold Crete.
It's like a little Alamo happening.
Yeah, that's pretty much it, right? Greeks do a lot of
And
Alamos.
This was just 2 years because wasn't Poland invasion like 38 or 39 or something?
39, yeah, in August or so. Yeah.
Wow,
So
that's
the
just
Greeks kind
wild.
of, the Greeks entered World War II relatively earlier in the war,
Yeah.
before Russia, after France. So there were some reasons to be optimistic, though. One big reason was that the Royal Navy was still a force to be reckoned with, and it was patrolling the northern coast of Crete, what we call the Sea of Crete, in between the mainland and, the south side of the Greek mainland, north side of Crete. The other reason was that the British had what was called Ultra, which in sum was an intelligence code-breaking project per se, that allowed the British to intercept German communications and decode them. As a result, the Brits already knew what the primary German strategies and objectives were, which of course is a huge advantage. So, what was the German plan? So, the German plan would paratroopers would be dropped above or near the airfields of Maleme, which is just west of Chania, Rethymno, which is a little farther east of Chania, and lastly at Iraklion, which is farther west of Rethymno, kind of at the middle point of the island. So for the Allies, these would be the main locations that were garrisoned in anticipation of attack. In addition, Chania and Suda Bay Naval Base were major defensive points, and some forces were tasked with guarding the coastline from possible sea landings. But even with the British sea superiority in the Cretan Sea, this won't stop the Germans from at least trying to make a seaborne landing. Oh, and as you can see also on the maps we'll have posted on the Instagram account, all three of these airfields and cities tightly hug the north coast of the island.
Yeah, it looks like there's not very much going on in Crete except on the coast. Am I wrong to say that?
No, you're not. You're not wrong. Even today, like, that's where
Yeah,
the
even today.
biggest... Yeah, like, that's just where the biggest of everything is. Like, it's all just located on the north side of the island. Like, all
Man,
the
so yeah,
cities
with
and
not
everything.
having air support, I would think that they could literally just. I don't know if they were doing like these airstrikes along the coast, the Germans, just wiping out a lot of the whatever resistance the
Oh, yeah.
Greeks might have had there.
Oh, yeah, you're going to see. I mean, it's going to take such a toll. So, I mean, the drawback of Ultra, because remember, like, Ultra's a big deal. It's a huge deal. And the drawback of it, though, is that no one could know you had Ultra. And, again, it's super important. It's not like Ultra was just anything. Ultra was almost everything. It was used extensively throughout much of World War II and would be continued to be used to net some really pivotal victories for the Allies in Guadalcanal, the Central Solomons, and New Guinea through late 1942 to early 1943. Thus, for obvious reasons, as I'm sure you can gather, Freyberg was given strict orders that no action could be taken solely based on Ultra, and that any document with Ultra could only be shared with very few senior officers, and of course, these documents would then be destroyed. So, like, no one could know about Ultra, right? And you can't do anything just based off Ultra because they might know, like, how else would these guys know that we're coming at this place at this time, right?
Okay.
Alternatively, the Germans would have their own quagmire in Crete. Starting from the top, Operation Mercury would be commanded primarily by General Kurt Student, with roughly 22,000 of his most elite paratroopers, or the Fallschirmjäger, which were in a nutshell the paratrooper branch of the Luftwaffe or German Air Force. So if you're seeing this number, the 22,000, right, elite paratroopers, whether they're elite or not, you're seeing 22,000, you're thinking, wow, that's not that many troops. And the reason for that is that the German reconnaissance absolutely shit the bed and estimated that there were only around 5 to 10,000 troops on the island.
Oh, whoa.
So, yeah, so like from the German standpoint, also not a great thing. Right? Nonetheless, these Fallschirmjäger were some of the creme de la creme of the Nazi war machine, and they would be the primary component to determine the success or the failure of this operation. They had been used in the war before, too, in the Low Countries in Scandinavia in 1940, and more recently in the capture of the Corinth Canal. And they had indeed proven themselves to be a strategic force in some situations, and frankly, they were the only game in town. The Royal Navy was still formidable, to say the least, and they were heavily patrolling the north coast of the island, as we already talked about. And the Italians, still licking their wounds from previous encounters with the Brits in the Aegean and the Adriatic, refused to provide outright support, nor did they want to do anything like act as bait to draw out the Royal Navy so as to give their Axis allies a short, opportunity to land on the north coast. So as long as the Royal Navy was still around in force, the Germans couldn't count on an amphibious landing on the island. They'll give it a try, as we'll see. Anyways, the date was set for May 20th, less than a month after Athens had been captured, and it was finalized that the assault to take Crete would come from the sky. And on that note, that's it for today, everyone. Please join us next time as the beleaguered allies and civilians on Crete continue their doomed but heroic resistance and face the elite Nazi airborne, the Fallschirmjäger. Adios.
Se